Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Capstone research presentation of the Outer Banks Field Site class of 2022. My name is Lindsay Dubbs. I am the director of the Outer Banks Field Site, and I teach ecology for the program. And along with Associate Director, Dr. Linda Dana, we lead the Capstone Research Project. Before I turn the mic over to the students, I want to provide a little bit of context for the research you're about to see and hear about, and to express thanks to the people and entities that helped the students get to this point. I am so proud of this class of students, and it makes me a little bit choked up, actually. They have been a fantastic group and individuals. They've taken unprecedented ownership over this project. I hope that you all, as an audience, are as impressed as the faculty is with this just one fruit of their labor, their hard work, attention to detail, and energy this semester. Please keep in mind that they did this research while also taking management, law and policy, and ecology classes, a lab, a seminar, and while participating in internships or independent research with a local entity that you're going to hear them introduce when they introduce themselves in just a moment. The Capstone is first and foremost an educational experience for our students, an opportunity for them to apply what they've learned from their tenure at UNC-Chapel Hill, our field site, and life to a real-world issue of importance to the Outer Banks. Unlike most research projects that last 1 year or more, they had a short 4 months to complete this project. We wish that we could keep them here longer so that they could go deeper and more broadly into this subject, but sadly, but also happily, they are off to other pursuits in a short time after this presentation. As I said, there are many people and entities who make the Outer Banks Field Site possible, including our host institution, the Coastal Studies Institute on the East Carolina University Outer Banks campus. Director Corbett and the faculty and staff of the Coastal Studies Institute provide a beautiful, welcoming space and enriching environment. One of those people, actually two of those people from CSI, who are helping us to be heard in this room and from afar today are John McCord and Blake Williams. Thank you, John and Blake, for recording and live streaming for us today. And thank you to Dare County and the Fessenden Center staff for hosting our presentation. At UNC-Chapel Hill, the Study Abroad Office, the Institute for the Environment, and the Environment, Ecology, and Energy program provide our fundamental academic and operational structure, and the people who support everything from accounting to emergency response to curriculum. We appreciate you all. This year, the students and faculty were really lucky to be assisted by a fantastic, reliable, and fun resident advisor, Cade Menzel. We were also assisted by a talented program assistant who had great ideas that she implemented with little to no oversight, Jane Bailey. Thank you so much, Cade and Jane. The success of the Capstone Research Project specifically benefited from the guidance of plant guru Kathy Mitchell, who can't be here tonight, and marine social scientist Dr. Eric Wade of Coastal Studies Institute, who taught the students the 3CM method you will hear about. Thank you to Kathy and Eric, Dr. Wade, sorry. We also greatly appreciate the community members who took the time to speak with the students this semester for this project. There were also community members who offered the students experiences and insights they would not have otherwise had during field trips and as guest speakers for classes. Thank you. Special thanks to our Community Advisory Board, or CAB, for your mentorship and support of the students throughout the semester. Thanks to the internship mentors for sharing your time and expertise with the students as you guided them through real-world experiences in environmental and legal careers. Finally, I would like to recognize the inspiring and committed faculty who I and the students are lucky to learn from and interact with over the course of the semester. Lee Leidy is the Field Site Coastal Law Professor. Andy Keeler teaches Environmental Economics and Policy for the site. And Linda Dana is the Outer Banks Field Site Coastal Management Professor. Okay, you're probably very happy to hear that I'm almost done with this intro. There are just a few things that I ask of you before the students get started. Please silence your phones if you're here with us in the Pheasant Center Annex. Also, everyone, the students look forward to entertaining your questions, comments, and suggestions, but please reserve them until the end of the presentation. Finally, if you would like more information about our program or would like to read the report that goes along with the presentation you're about to see, it will go into more detail. Just Google OBXFS and you will find us. The report won't be posted for a few more days, though. Thank you so much once again for your interest and support, everyone here and online. I now introduce the incomparable Outer Banks Field Site class of 2022.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. We'll be going around and introducing ourselves first before we begin. My name is Tara Hinton. I'm from Silva, North Carolina. I'm a sophomore at Chapel Hill, and I interned at CSI in Lindsay's lab, actually.
Hi, I'm Kayla Emerson. I'm from Davidson, North Carolina. I'm a senior at UNC-Chapel Hill, and I completed independent study with Lindsay Dubs.
Hi, my name is Emmy Trevette. I'm a junior at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I am from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and my internship was at CSI with Outreach and John McCord.
Hi, my name is Josh Hyman. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, junior at UNC, and I interned with George Bonner at CSI.
Hi, I'm Anna Smith. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a senior, and I interned with Quibel & Associates.
Hi, I'm Julia Elliott. I'm a senior from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I interned with the National Park Service this semester.
Hello, I'm Leanna Mail. I'm a senior from Mint Hill, North Carolina, and I interned with the Public Defender's Office.
Hi, I'm Anya Raheja. I'm a junior from Jacksonville, Florida, and I interned at Pine Island Sanctuary.
Hi, I'm Sophie Nichols. I'm from Bethesda, Maryland, and I'm a senior, and I interned with Aaron McCauley at the Nags Head Woods.
Hi, I'm Quinn. I'm from Connecticut, and I interned with the North Carolina Coastal Federation.
And hi, I'm Jared Henry. I'm from Charlotte. I'm a junior, and I interned with Rachel Veal at the aquarium. And I'll give this back to Tara.
So again, my name is Tara, and I want to thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you taking your time to come out and watch this. We're really excited to present to you our capstone research project entitled Roots in the Sand, Human Perspectives and Vegetation Change of Buxton Woods. So I want to start out today by outlining the things that we'll cover. First, I'll tell you a little bit about the purpose of our study, and then we'll go into the background and history of Buxton Woods. Then we'll hear from the human dimensions section of our study, and then the natural system. And finally, we'll wrap up with conclusions and insights about our work. So this study is a continuation of the 2021 Outer Banks Field Site Capstone, and we'll study similar things, but with slightly different questions. Our purpose this year was to understand how the vegetation in Buxton Woods has changed since initial surveys in 1988. We also wanted to better understand how people think about and relate and feel about Buxton Woods. And again, this will expand upon our 2021 research. So with that being said, that means our work has sort of two different sides. A human dimension side, which is more qualitative and looks at perspectives and feelings, and then a natural system side, which looks at more of the ecology of the woods in a quantitative way. And so with that information, I'll hand it off to Kayla Emerson to give us a bit of a background about Buxton Woods.
All right, thank you, Tara. Once again, I'm Kayla, and to get us all on the same page, I'm going to go through some background information about Buxton Woods. So Buxton Woods is a maritime forest located on Lower Hatteras Island. It's one of the largest maritime forests on the Atlantic coast, and the combination of the warm Gulf Stream and cold deepwater currents, such as the Labrador Current, creates a really unique mix of temperate and tropical vegetation in Buxton Woods. So like I just said, Buxton Woods is a maritime forest. Maritime forests form when sand dunes turn into mature vegetated dunes. They also have a variety of uses, ranging from hunting, hiking, horseback riding, and their aquifers are commonly used as a drinking water source. Maritime forests are really important because they protect the mainland from powerful storms such as hurricanes and nor'easters. They also provide a refuge from human activity and contain diverse plant and animal species. With that being said, maritime forests are evolving systems. They're prone to disturbances, and their vegetation changes in response to those disturbances. But we'll touch on more of that later. So there's a lot of history behind Buxton Woods, so let's look at this timeline. Historically, Buxton Woods has been used for logging, grazing, and recreation. In the 1960s, the National Park Service gained ownership over a large portion of Buxton Woods with the Cape Hatteras National Seashore, although this left a lot of Buxton still unprotected. Then in 1986, developers proposed building a golf course on Buxton Woods, and some community members didn't want to see the woods developed, and so they formed an organization called Friends of Hatteras. Friends of Hatteras worked together and petitioned the state to protect Buxton Woods, and the state listened. The state claimed Buxton Woods as a special environmental district. Then in 1988, the North Carolina Coastal Reserve gained ownership of about 1,000 acres of Buxton Woods. This created two management entities in Buxton Woods. And the North Carolina Coastal Reserve is a really important management entity because they own 10 properties across the state, and these are commonly used for long-term research and education purposes. And that brings us to present day. So this history of community involvement in the protection of Buxton Woods and the combination of management makes Buxton Woods a largely untouched and cherished maritime forest, which makes it a perfect place for our research. And now getting into what Buxton Woods looks like today. So it's still used for a lot of similar things, such as recreation and a drinking water source, and research and education. But like I just said, there are two management entities. So on this northern part in white, you can see the Coastal Reserve owns that part of the land. And then in blue, the National Park Service owns the southern portion. That means that Buxton Woods is under state and federal jurisdiction. Now that we have some background on Buxton Woods, let's get into our study. So I'm gonna bring Emmy up, and she's gonna lead you through the first portion of the human dimensions section.
Thank you, Kayla. Hi, again, my name is Emmy, and I'm going to lead you through the human dimensions portion of our study. Okay. So, as she said before, Tara, the purpose of our study is to better understand how stakeholders think and feel about Buxton Woods. Our stakeholders included both management professionals and residents. This is how we did that. Through 10 semi-structured interviews, which were also recorded conversations we later used for qualitative analysis, we also had a mind mapping activity that we brought to the interviews to visualize how these individuals, who we did, again, interview, think, organize their thoughts. Through this, we use 3CM. This is a conceptual content cognitive map. This is what 3CM is. First, we, as the cohort, had to decide how we would choose the concepts. Next, we had to let the interviewees do the work for us. So, I know, it's a little overwhelming, right? Using the 2021 interviews, we went through and pulled 213 concepts that either appeared most frequently or they had some sort of significance in the conversations that we got to go through and they were recorded. So after much discussion and debate, we narrowed it down and we got 26 final concepts. We felt that these most thoroughly encompassed how the residents in last year's interviews described their relationships with Buxton Woods, and they had a lot to say. So we had a lot to cover. I want to lead you through an interview now. This is the question that we would start with every interview. Imagine you're talking to someone who knows nothing about Buxton Woods. Which of these items or concepts do you need to be able to explain the woods and why it matters to you? It's a decent question. So after we would ask them that, this is the set of answers that we would provide. As I said before, the concepts that we narrowed down to 26 would be on note cards. These are the ones we provided, and the ones in the corner would be blank, so if you felt as if something weren't included, you could add it on your own. We would ask you to choose what you thought, again, best answered that question. You might have done something like this. You could have said forest loss, education development, or aesthetics. We would have asked why you chose those things. As you went through, we would have asked other questions along those lines. After that, we wanted to know in what way grouping them made the most sense to you. So we would ask you to group them and then give them titles, again, in a way that makes the most sense to you, emphasizing the open-endedness of this method. After that, we would have wanted you to rank them in importance and how you would explain Buxton Woods. So you could have done something like this. Okay, I'm gonna hand it over to Josh and Anna, who will explain the results of our study.
Hello, thank you, Emmy, and I'm Josh, and this is Anna. So we conducted all of these interviews and then had to pull data out of it in order to understand what we had found. So the main things that we looked at when doing so was frequency and group rank. Frequency is the number of times a concept card was chosen by our interviewees, and group rank was the rank given to the group that concept was sorted into. We then brought those together to create a new variable called prominence. We will discuss what that is a little bit later. As an example of how that works, this is the example you just saw and the ranks that they were given. We're going to run through the Friends of Hatteras. So this interviewee chose Friends of Hatteras, which means that they felt it was an important concept. That would add 1 to the overall frequency across all of the interviews. Additionally, Friends of Hatteras would receive a group rank of 1 because it is in a group that was ranked 1. So the group rank is about the group, and all of the concepts within it receive that rank.
Hello, I'm Anna, and just to run through some of those variables in visual ways, we decided to make some graphs and figures. So again, frequency is the number of times a concept card was chosen. To view this, we did it in 2 ways. The first was a word cloud. So the size of the font of the concept represents the frequency or the number of times that concept was chosen. So for example, Coastal Reserve is very large, along with Personal Connection, meaning it was chosen by a vast majority of our participants, whereas something like aesthetics was chosen by less people. Now on this next slide, it's the exact same information, just in a more quantitative way. So if you look in this red highlighted box, these are the concepts that were chosen the most frequent at 9 times. So plants and animals, needs protection, and Coastal Reserve. And then if you look at the blue box on the end, these are actually the added concepts that participants created. And so what's interesting is that 2 participants created NC Gamelands as another concept, which kind of indicates that maybe we missed something in our selection process, and that's good to know for the future. But it is valued by the community. Now for the next visual, we're gonna look at group rank, which is the rank given to the group that each concept was sorted into, not the individual concept itself. So here's another way to look at things. So on the x-axis is highest group rank, and then on the y is frequency, with it running up. And so to look at this, we're gonna look at some examples. So National Park Service, it's moderately chosen by about 5 or so of our participants, but when it's chosen, it's lowly ranked. Versus local sense of ownership was chosen by very few of our participants, but when it was chosen, it was highly ranked, so it's very important by them. And then lastly, needs protection is on the high end of both frequency and rank, meaning that it was chosen by a lot of people and it was also highly ranked when it was chosen.
We then needed to bring those 2 together to understand how each of them impacted the overall value placed on an individual concept. So that brought us to prominence, which is the value of both frequency and group rank together. This is a graph of the calculated variable we created called prominence that brings both of those together. So to run through those same examples, we have National Park Service, which was chosen a moderate number of times, but not rated very highly in its group, which means it's relatively low. Additionally, we have local sense of ownership, which was not chosen very many times, but was ranked pretty highly when it was chosen. We also have needs protection, which was both of those. It was chosen very frequently and was also ranked very highly when it was chosen. This allows us to distill out which concepts were important to our interviewees across all of the interviews in both ways that they could value a concept. I will now pass it off to Julia to talk about our group trends.
All right. Thank you, Josh and Anna. I'm Julia, and I will be, as Josh said, running you through some of the group trends that we found through analyzing our data. So we'll be looking at specific groups that people made, the concepts that they put in these groups, and the titles that they gave to these groups, and trying to look for some similarities and differences. So I wanted to start out by giving you an actual example of some groups that were created. So participant 4 here created 3 groups titled Management, Biology, Ecology, and Recreation. And the number of concepts in these groups ranged from 2 to 5. If you want to look at the middle group, Biology, Ecology, they used concepts such as plants and animals, fresh water source, so very ecologically based concepts. They also used personal connection, because that's how they felt most connected to Buxton Woods. To compare, here we have another participant. It looks pretty different. They created 6 groups, and the number of concepts range from 1 to 4. To compare to the first participant, they also used the concept plants and animals and fresh water source, but they put them in a group titled uniqueness, because that's how they felt the woods was most unique, through the plants and animals, and the fact that it was a fresh water source, along with a couple other concepts. So this shows how different the groups were. There were a lot of differences, so you might be asking if there were any similarities, and there were. For example, 5 of our participants created a group with management in the title, so I'll be running you through these various groups because we found multiple different perspectives of viewing management. So here is one of those groups. The box in the middle is the title, so the title was management. The circles around it show the different concepts that they put into this group. As you can see, they chose things such as traditional uses and hunting, as well as Coastal Reserve and National Park Service, so specific management agencies. Another group with management in the title is this one. They also chose Coastal Reserve. And the third one also chose National Park Service and Coastal Reserve, and they even created more concepts related to specific management agencies such as Dare County and NC Game Lands. So this was one perspective of looking at management, so looking at specific management entities, what they were doing specifically in the woods, and their various opinions about their management strategies, and there were a lot of opinions. Luckily. The next perspective that people viewed management through was shown in the next 2 management titled groups, number 4 and number 5. This was much more based on personal connection. So as you can see, the concepts that they had in common were education and the fact that Buxton is a small community. So that was just another perspective and a different way of looking at management. Rather than looking at specific entities or agencies, they viewed their personal usage of Buxton Woods and kind of form their opinions based off of this perspective. So besides just looking at the concepts, I wanted to give you some examples of quotes that people said to back up these specific perspectives. Going back to the management agency perspective, one participant said, "Management incorporates the rules that protect the property, then continuing that protection through good management decisions." Another participant explained why they put 2 concepts into their management titled group. "I put Coastal Reserve and accessibility together because the Coastal Reserve manages Buxton Woods, so accessibility is, in a sense, up to them." And then going to the next perspective, which again was based more on a personal connection rather than looking at specific management agencies, this participant said, "Education ties into management because it's how you're educating the public about how to use the land." So they really believe that the more you educate the public, the more the woods will inherently be managed because people will know how to better use the land. So what does all of this mean? Basically, even within groups with the same title, we found that people had varying perspectives, and it really shows how diverse the Buxton community is and how diverse their opinions are related to the woods and how it is or should be managed. And now that I've talked about management a lot, and I talked about it as a concept and as a group title, I'll pass it over to Tara to talk about the people in these management positions and how they group their concepts compared to residents.
Thank you, Julia. So, as Emmy mentioned in our methods section, we interviewed 6 Buxton residents and 4 management professionals. So in this section, I want to explore similarities and differences for concepts that were important to these groups of people. On the left, you can see concepts that were important to management. This means that they were chosen frequently and in groups that were ranked highest. These concepts were hunting, accessibility, and the Coastal Reserve. Now, these important concepts looked a little bit different for residents. They were forest loss, concerns about the future, geographically isolated, and development. But we also found some concepts that were important to both groups. Those were needs protection, personal connection, and freshwater source. But The big difference that we found between these groups was that forest loss and concerns about the future were brought up so frequently by residents, but never explicitly used by management, even though they were often brought up in interviews. So why might this be? Well, unsurprisingly, it seems that management professionals view disturbances to Buxton Woods, like development, in terms of their management activities or duties, their jobs. So let's look at an example. In our resident interviews, they might have grouped these important concepts, forest loss and concern for the future, with development and needs protection. Usually, they stated a concern that development would harm the canopy of Buxton Woods. But for residents, they might have used the same concept, development, and grouped it with different terms involving management, like the coastal reserve, education, or small community. Usually in interviews, they would tend to emphasize the need for education and communication about Buxton Woods as a way of protecting that natural resource in an area that's so rapidly developing. But overall, both management and residents are noticing disturbances to Buxton Woods. They're just viewing them through different lenses. They're viewing their lenses about concerns about the future differently. But overall, I think it's important to come back to the similarities. Everyone that we interviewed had very profound connections to Buxton Woods, and they all valued Buxton Woods for its ecosystem services, especially its use as a freshwater resource. And fundamentally, all of our interviewees said that Buxton Woods needs protection now and in the future. I really like the way one of our management professionals put it. They said, in the forward-thinking mind, Buxton Woods needs protection in perpetuity because it is such a special site. It has habitats that need to be protected because they're unique globally. Or, as one of our residents put it, it's Buxton Woods holding the island together. And now that we've covered some group trends in thinking about Buxton Woods, I'd like to hand it over to Leanna, who will give you some conclusions from our human dimensions.
Thank you, Tara. Hello, I'm Leanna. And to start off, we wanted to highlight this quote. Individuals are often not fully aware of the cognitive structure underlying their decisions. So that was the intent of our study, was to kind of fill in that gap and figure out what exactly people are thinking about in this area. But before we get into the summary and insights, we want to address some of the limitations of our study. It happens in many studies, we just want to acknowledge them. And to start off, we had a small sample size. So if you remember, we had 10 interviewees. That's not truly a representative sample and isn't generalizable to the entire Buxton community. Next, the way we found those interviewees was by convenience sampling, meaning the people we chose we thought would be stakeholders in the community anyway. And once that was done, following through the 3CM method, the concept collection is inherently biased. So that process of narrowing down from 213 to 26 concepts, we chose what was important, so our opinions are in there. And then once we had those concepts, we had 10 different interviewers, meaning less standardization, possible misinterpretation or different interpretation of the 3CM method could have affected results. And then finally, after all of this was completed, we realized that our question was slightly confusing. If you remember, our question asks, how would you explain the Buxton Woods and why is it important to you? So if you really think about it, that's two questions in one. And so to do this again, we would probably recommend that we go ahead and do 2 rounds of the 3CM method so that you have one focusing on how you explain Buxton Woods and then also another one explaining why Buxton Woods is important. So going from there, our overall results are suggestive. So knowing that there is a great variance in how you group rank or how you group concepts, what ranks they are given, all mean that they're usually just going to be a tool and a snapshot of the current times. People change within themselves and they change over time. So it's a useful thing in the future. To summarize though, varying wants and desires for how the space is used affected what they chose. Different backgrounds, different experiences, mean that people, of course, are going to be different. And then we also saw through our analysis that there are patterns that show similarities and differences. We saw patterns within patterns and a whole bunch of different stuff. It was fun. But the main thing is there is great concern for the future of Buxton Woods. So knowing that, our insights for our analysis is that our research just provides documentation of what is currently going on. It is a potential resource for management, and it could potentially encourage community participation or foster some kind of collaboration between stakeholders in the local community. And to summarize, we had our lovely participant 5 do an excellent job of that. So I think Buxton Woods is probably the most influenced by people's feelings, and that's very true. So I'm going to pass the mic off to Anya. She's going to go over natural systems.
Thank you, Leanna. Once again, I am Anya, and I'm going to move y'all into the natural system side of our study. So the purpose of our natural system side was to document the change in vegetative composition and structure found in Buxton Woods from 1988 to present day. In 1988, the original researchers sampled 8 plots, or fixed swatches of land, across Buxton that sampled the diverse vegetative communities found in the woods. They marked these plots with metal stakes, or conduits, which we were then able to find over 30 years later. Last year's field site resampled 3 of the original plots, and this year we resampled 2 more. All 5 plots are shown up here with the green and blue dots. This figure represents a cross-section or a side view of a barrier island, much like Hatteras Island. So the first plot that we sampled this year was a mid-slope plot located on the side of a vegetated dune. A mid-slope plot has average levels of elevation and soil moisture compared to other locations in the woods. The second plot that we sampled this year was an upland plot, which has the highest level of elevation present in the woods, but lowest levels of soil moisture relatively. Last year's field site also sampled an upland plot, and they sampled 2 swale plots. A swale plot is the area between a dune, which has low elevation, but really high levels of soil moisture. So it might be inundated with water throughout the year, or even the entire year, depending on the plot and the rain levels that year. In 1988, the researchers used the Carolina Vegetation Survey, or CVS for short, which creates a snapshot of the vegetative communities found at the time of sampling, and it standardizes sampling across all locations, so you can use comparisons. We also used the CVS method this year and last year. The CVS method has woody stems, which Quinn is sampling in this picture, and, really connecting with the stems. Woody stems form the understory and overstory canopy in the woods, and they can range from plants like red bays to red oaks, and they're really important in helping regulate environmental factors that affect the woods, like light and salt spray. The other part of the CVS method measures cover, which is all the plants located in the plot, and how much of the plot they take up. This is really important to determine diversity and plant biomass. The woody stem team looked at every stem that reached about breast height, which is like here, 1.3 meters, and they measured the species and amount of every species. They also measured the diameter of the trees at breast height, and it's really important to note that even though there were dead trees still standing in the plots, we did not sample them. The cover team measured the species present at every height, not just the ones that reached breast height, and how much of the plot they covered up. So the cover is spread into 3 height classifications, or strata. The first, herbaceous, spans from the ground to about 0.5 meter, about here. The second, shrub, takes up after the herbaceous from 0.5 meter to 5 meters, which is way taller than me, so I cannot reach the ceiling, past the ceiling. And the last cover class, tree, is anything 5 meters and above. Now, one plant might span multiple cover classes. Like, let's look at this tree, for example. The base of the tree would be in the herbaceous stratum. This trunk of the tree and maybe some of the lower overhanging branches would be in the shrub stratum. And then the rest of the tree, the large canopy cover and leaves at top would all be in the tree stratum. So we were able to use this data to give a visualization of how much of the plot is covered by plants at every height level. So imagine the gray square is the total area of the plot. The green circle represents how much of the plot is covered by plants in the tree height, which is, again, over 5 meters. The black circle represents how much of the plot is covered by plants in the shrub height, which is from 0.5 meter to 5 meters. And this white circle here represents how much of the plot is covered by plants at the herbaceous level, 0.5 meter and below. Like this diagram, the cover strata in the plots is layered, so you could have an oak tree that's 7 meters tall and has leaves that are overhanging grasses on the ground, and you would count the cover of both plants just at the different strata. So now I'm going to hand it over to Kayla and Sophie to talk about the results.
Hello, again, thanks Anya, and I am Sophie. And so after adventuring through the woods and sampling, what are our actual results? First off, we broke the results into 2 themes. First is forest composition and then forest structure. And forest composition answered the question, what is actually in Buxton Woods? And so to measure this, we look at species richness, which is the number of unique species in the woods. So species richness, overall, we saw that Buxton Woods had an increase of 4 unique species from 46 to 50. We saw that most of these were grasses. Across the plots, it was a little different. It increased in 3 plots, it decreased in 1, and there was no change in another. So what plants were actually lost? So here we have, this is the coral honeysuckle, very pretty. Then we have false nettle, which is an herbaceous plant. And then we also have climbing hydrangea, which is a vine. And so walking through Buxton Woods, you might have noticed that one of your favorite plants is no longer there from 1988. As for what plants were gained, we have a grass, we have the lovely devil's walking stick, and we have the summer grape, which is right there. Overall, so 14 species were lost since 1988, but 17 species were gained. And a more diverse forest is a more stable forest.
All right, thank you, Sophie. So now looking at the woody stems that create the unique species in Buxton Woods. So like Anya mentioned, a woody stem is a canopy-forming species, so trees. So these pie charts represent the change in the species composition of the woody stems from 1988 to present day. The size of the slice is the number of stems of that unique species, and this covers the 5 sampled plots. So as we can see in 1988, the flowering dogwood, the ironwood, and the red oak are really prominent species. They had a lot of stems in the plots. And then we move to present day, and the red and swamp bays, the loblolly pines, and the red oaks are still really prominent. But this introduction of the bays and the loblolly pines is really interesting. We saw a lot of those species. And then if you notice, the flowering dogwood has almost completely diminished. So another way to look at this is just focusing on the species that are changing the most. So this bar chart represents the change in number of canopy-forming stems, so those woody stems. So on the left, in the green, it represents an increase in number of stems since 1988. So those species are loblolly pine and red and swamp bays and others. And then on the right, in the gray, we see a decrease in a lot of species. So red oaks, ironwoods, and flowering dogwoods show the most decrease since 1988.
Now on to the second theme, which is forest structure. So for the plants that are still with us, we want to know where are they and how much area do they take up. So there are 3 ways to actually measure forest structure, and that is cover, or amount of area a plant takes up, their size, and what strata they are found at. So what are the cover change trends in Buxton Woods? Overall, we see that there is a decrease in cover. And decrease, 4 out of the 5 plots did decrease, except 1 plot did actually increase. And so what is driving this loss in cover? It is the loblolly pines, the flowering dogwoods, and the red and swamp bays. And this might seem counterintuitive because loblolly pines and red and swamp bays actually had an increase in stem count. But this is because we're seeing the loss of mature, older species that have larger cover, but they're being replaced by these younger, smaller individuals that have a lot less cover. And then for the positive, for the species that are actually increasing in cover, we see the American holly, the Yopon holly, and the southern wax myrtle, and these are more shrub tree species that are also salt spray tolerant. Here is another visualization. We have species on the x-axis and change in cover on the y. Again, loblolly pines and flowering dogwoods and the bays are driving this cover loss. Our data does have some error in it, which are represented by these little arrow bars. So for example, red oaks, they increased in a couple of plots, but they decreased in one. The data is uneven, and so it's represented by this error bar. As for what species are increasing, again, it's the American holly, southern wax myrtle, Yopon holly, as well as the muscadine vine. So this visualization represents a snapshot of the forest cover at each strata. We have 3 strata groups, which is the tree, represented in green, shrub, represented in black, and herbaceous, represented in white. We can see that in upland plot 206, it has the largest tree canopy cover. This was actually the only plot to increase since 1988, which means that it is more dense. Then we have swale plot 209, which is kind of the opposite. It has the smallest tree canopy cover. This plot had the greatest decrease in cover. It is more open than it was in 1988. This plot decreased to just 1/5 of its 1988 cover. And what's driving this loss was the death of dogwoods. There was a complete wipeout. It dropped from 30% cover to 0. Many of our interviewees also noted that there was the death of dogwoods in the forest. And this might be because the swale had a disturbance and has a earlier successional stage, which is evident by the prominence of shrubs over trees. But in general, we see that most plots are dominated by tree species, followed by shrubs and herbaceous. And like I said earlier, the forest today is less dense than it was in 1988. Back to Kayla.
Okay, so now that we have this idea of the composition of Buxton Woods, so what species are present, and the structure, where those species are, and what kind of space they occupy, let's put both ideas together. So this bubble chart represents the change in species from several different variables from 1988 to present day. So each species represents a different color bubble. Along the y-axis is number of stems. The further up a bubble is, the more number of stems we saw. And along the x-axis is average stem diameter. The further right a bubble is, the larger its diameter, the more mature the species is. And lastly, the size of the bubble represents its average percent cover. The larger a bubble is, the larger percent cover that species had, and the more space is taking up in Buxton Woods. And so with 1988's data on the left and present day on the right, you can see that every species changed in some way. So this is just really important for understanding that Buxton Woods is a changing place. And so to recap what Sophie and I touched on, overall, species richness remains somewhat stable. Buxton has a lot of unique species, and it's a diverse place. In addition, cover for most species remains stable. So at the individual level, those species are remaining somewhat the same, except for a few. And that actually led to a net decline in cover. So like Sophie mentioned, Buxton Woods in the plots that we sampled is a less dense forest now. And that's just driven by a few major species. So with all that being said, I'm gonna hand it over to Quinn, and she'll lead you through the first part of our discussion.
So thank you, Kayla and Sophie. So I'm Quinn, and I'm going to be leading you through the interpretation of our results. But before we get into the results, I just want to share a few limitations to our study with you. So similar to the human dimensions side, we did have a small sample size as we only sampled 5 plots from 2021 and 2022. So with those results, we cannot make generalizations to the entire Buxton Woods, but we can try to come up or suggest conclusions as to why we observe the changes in the 5 plots that we did sample. Secondly, we are unable to make causal relationships between specific storm events or other disturbances that might be driving this change over the whole 34-year period. And then in the 1988 team, they had sampled in May, whereas our group and last year's group sampled in the fall. So that could have affected the cover species that we had seen. Despite these limitations, we will provide conclusions or suggest reasons as to why we do see this change. So to follow the same structure as the results, we are going to begin with forest composition. And to reiterate, forest composition is species richness, or what species are found in Buxton Woods. So first we want to hone in on the change in redden swamp bays and loblolly pines. So as you can see, the redden swamp bays and loblolly pines both increase in the number of stems as the bubbles are higher up on the chart. Additionally, the percent cover decreased as the bubbles are now smaller. So as this may seem counterintuitive, this is due to the loss of mature species and the increase in juveniles. So a potential reason for that could be the diseases or pests. So the first disease we'll be discussing is laurel wilt. So laurel wilt is a fungus that affects redden swamp bays in the southeastern region of the United States. So although this disease has not yet been found in Dare County, you can see in the map on the right that it has been found in almost every county just south. So we did notice trees that look similar to ones that are infected by the laurel wilt disease from the picture on the left. So a typical tree that is infected has the reddish brown leaves. So we did not record these in the study because they were dead, but we did observe a lot. Secondly, the native pine beetle could be driving the change in the loblolly pines. So the native pine beetle are, in 1993, Hurricane Emily came and a native pine beetle outbreak was noticed in the Buxton area. So native pine beetles are not typically found in barrier islands, but it has been recorded in the Buxton area before. So it could have been driving the change for the loss of the mature species. Additionally, loblolly pines are more susceptible to diseases like pine needle rust that could be driving the loss of the mature species. So the next trend we want to look at is the die-off of the flowering dogwoods. So you can see that the number of stems dramatically decreased to almost 0, and that also drove the decrease in cover as the bubble in this graph is smaller. So a potential reason for this die-off could be due to the dogwood anthracnose. So dogwood anthracnose is also a fungus that affects trees that are mostly like north-facing, which we did correlate with the data that we collected for our north-facing plots. Yeah, so this might potentially be a reason for the decrease in the species, and it has been recorded in Dare County before, but it has not been proven. So now I'm going to hand it off to Jared, who's going to continue our discussion with forest structure.
All right, thank you, Quinn. Like Quinn said, I'll be continuing with talking about forest structure. We're keeping with the same format as results to keep everything kind of simple. And if you remember, forest structure is kind of asking the question of how are the plants growing or where are they found? So the first trend I want to talk about is about juvenile versus mature for loblollies and live oaks. As Quinn talked about earlier, we've seen the loss of mature loblollies and an increase in juveniles. But if you notice in the pink boxes, and if this pointer works, there we go. pretty much the same live oaks have persisted and matured. They've increased in diameter from around 50 centimeters to almost 150. In fact, we only lost one live oak from all of our plots that we sampled. What could be a possible reason for this? A simple answer: differences in growth rates in deer browsing. As we know, live oaks are really slow-growing protective species that spend a lot of time and energy in producing acorns to give their offspring the best chance at survival. While loblollies, on the other hand, are pretty fast-growing, kind of like prolific breeders, really spreading their babies everywhere around. So that means those pine cones aren't as nutritious and therefore aren't as preferred by deer. So deer browsing on live oaks could be a reason why we don't see juveniles. However, as you can see with the blue color for Dare County, it has one of the lowest deer population densities at less than 10 per square mile, so that might not be as much of a contributing factor here. The next trend I want to talk about is resilience versus resistance. In this sense, resilience is the ability to bounce back from a change, while resistance is the ability to resist a change. So we've talked about loblollies, we've talked about live oaks a little bit. So I'm gonna throw another major species at you, red oaks. As you can see, red oaks have pretty much persisted and matured, getting bigger diameters and growing in cover. So why did red oaks and live oaks persist, but loblollies once again? What could be a reason why they're set back to being juveniles? Hurricanes and storms. We're on a barrier island, and plenty of you know we experience storms all the time. In the last 34 years, major hurricanes have included Emily, Isabel, Dorian, and plenty more. All these storms really affect these canopy-forming species, like the oaks and loblolly pines. But also, we know that the oaks are really resistant to hurricane force winds and can resist breakage, while loblollies are pretty weak, and you can see on that photo on the right, will pretty much snap in half and die. So that could be a reason. And the last trend I want to talk about is salt tolerance. I just mentioned red oaks, but if you look in the bottom left-hand corner at the Yaupon and American hollies, they increased across all three variables from 1988. We saw more, they were bigger, and they took up more space. What do all three of these species have in common? They're moderately to highly salt spray tolerant. As you know, the ocean's right there. Salt spray is, it's right there. Salt spray is a daily factor in the lives of these plants and our lives too. And salt spray occurs when salt deposits on leaves as water evaporates, burning the leaf tissue, which you can see on the photo on the right. So damage to the protective canopy from hurricanes and storms, like knocking out those loblollies, can expose the understory to salt spray and affect the species there, where we find American and Yaupon holly. So increases in salt spray could explain the increases in those hollies, as well as the persistence of the red oaks. Okay, so Quinn and I just threw a bunch of suggestions for change at you, and I'm gonna hand it off now to Anna and Josh to finish and round out our presentation.
Thank you, Jared. So this was a large study with two major parts. And although we studied the natural and human systems as separate parts, we're hoping to provide a singular snapshot to you of Buxton Woods and the communities surrounding it as a singular snapshot in a long history. From the human side of our study, we were able to piece out important concepts across our interviews that the community may value. And from our natural study, we were able to understand trends such as the increase in salt-tolerant structure of the forest. Together, we hope that this documentation of these two systems can provide a resource for various stakeholders to understand the present and make decisions about the future.
As a final takeaway, this is a quote from one of our interview participants who said, "The woods will maintain itself as long as man is respectful. The more you can learn about it, the better you can protect it, but I think it's important to keep a finger on the pulse." So coastal management is about balancing conservation and development, and this is our attempt to put a finger on the pulse and hopefully provide some insight in that snapshot of the woods through its vegetation and community perspectives, as Josh said. And so, again, we wanted to thank you all for coming. It was an honor to study the woods across this semester. And we have a few more acknowledgements to do. So from Lindsay, Linda, Lee, and Andy, thank you for teaching us across the semester, along with our internship mentors who helped us along the way. For the CAB board, they were very insightful and gave us plenty of feedback that we really needed. And then additionally, just anybody who was involved in the study, from the interviewees and everybody else. And with that being said, thank you all for coming again, whether in person or online. We're going to have a Q&A following this, but if there are any lingering questions, please email this address, uncobxfs@gmail.com, and we'll follow up and hopefully have some answers. Thank you.
It's okay. I'm okay.
We're still on, maybe? Great. Thank you all so much for your presentation. We'd love to open up for questions that anyone may have for our students, comments, both here in the room or online. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, and I'll bring the microphone over to you so that everyone, both here and online, can hear you.
You didn't talk about drought tolerance, and it seemed to me that there was one particular year, about 15 years ago, I don't know which year, where it was exceptionally dry, and that seemed to kill off the flowering dogwoods.
2001.
So,
2001.
it was that long ago, okay. Time flies. And I'm wondering whether it's likely that the dogwoods could recover. Prior to that, there was Hurricane Emily in '93, and that was also a huge change that I noticed with the pine trees falling and then the insects coming. But those two events, the drought of what was the year again? 2001, and Hurricane Emily, they were the most remarkable changes that I noticed.
So like Hurricane Emily came up a lot in all of the interviews. And Jared and Quinn mentioned Hurricane Emily. The loblolly pines, yeah, they don't respond well to the hurricanes. They do snap in half. And then, yeah, Hurricane Emily brought the pine beetle. Well, it's believed to bring the pine beetle, which was also affecting that population. Didn't look specifically into droughts or years where there were big droughts. Some species don't respond as well to major, really dry or really wet. Like they can't do those high fluctuations.
How about the dogwood? Do you know about dogwood and its drought tolerance?
No. It did come in our interviews, but through our research, we haven't been able to find anything specific. Yeah.
Hey, this was awesome. This was really super interesting. So when you had the plot with the forest cover in it, I was looking at the live oaks there, and so the live oaks didn't really change in number, right? And the stem, diameter or breast height increased, right? So the trees got much larger. But it seemed like the percent cover, or the coverage actually went down in terms of like the size of the bubble from 1988 until present. And so I was just curious, you guys being out there and doing this survey, did you notice anything kind of strange or different about the cover of the live oaks? Did it seem like they were kind of sparse or something like that? I just think it's an interesting change, seeing the trees get so much larger, but coverage actually decreasing.
One thing of note is that we did lose just one live oak, but every single live oak has a huge cover percentage. And so it may be because we just lost one huge live oak.
I don't think when we were out there we noticed anything really different or like weird about the growth of the live oaks. Yeah, just really the loss of that one.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Got some questions online. George Bonner says, great, great presentation. Did you benchmark with any other maritime forest studies to compare results?
Yes, we did. Short answer. A lot of the stuff from the discussion section of the natural system side was in relation to papers that we read about other maritime forests and comparing the trends in Buxton Woods to trends in other maritime forests, both with just general species richness and forest accession, and also with in regards to major storm events.
Got another question online if no one else in the audience. One more question. Eric Nichols would like to know, what is the biggest driver of change that you identified?
Okay, Dad. I feel like I stated this multiple times, but it was the loss of, it was loblolly pines. And again, I mean, they just snap in half after hurricanes. And there was a disease that was going around. What? Yeah, a pest. But they are prolific breeders, like Jared said. So they are very resilient, so they will probably just come back.
Are they native to the area?
Yes.
Repeat that question.
He asked, are they native to the area? And I said yes.
Are you familiar with that picture?
I'm not.
That's Loggerhead Road around the 1930s. And you can see there's no trees there.
Yeah.
And now, Loggerhead Road is filled with pine trees and two different kinds of pine trees. It's just the succession process.
Yeah.
Say it again.
Sure. Okay, so that could be in part due to the natural succession process. So the dunes start out with smaller plants vegetating them, and then they move on to the larger ones like trees. So you might have shrubs at first and smaller grasses, and then move on. And that can happen over the period of only a few decades. Like if you look at where I interned at Pine Island, apparently like 60 years ago, there was not a single plant, and now it's covered in live oaks. So it could be the same thing you're seeing there.
I bring that up because there was talk about the, in the 1930s, government planting trees. I don't know whether that's true or not. But as part of the CCC. CCC, right. They plant a lot of vegetation.
Yeah, that's something we could look into further. I don't have an answer for that right now, but I know that loblolly pines are native to the area, and all the plants we found in the study were native to the area, right? Yeah.
We have another question back here.
I don't need a mic. Another dad question. Okay. That's just my ignorance. So I want to understand the term cover exactly. I want to know if it means just area, just an area spread from tip to tip of the tree. We're not talking about density, mass, the number, how thick the tree is. Is that correct? And if that is, then I'd like to know what you noticed about. Did you notice anything about the density of the canopy if we're not measuring that in cover? And then on the other side, I may not understand what you can develop in protected piece of property, either federal or state, one of the big concerns was development. Is that development in these pieces of property? And what is that? Or is this development beside the properties?
Okay, I'll take the first part of that question with cover. So how we thought about cover is if you look at a tree and you took all its leaves and you smushed it into a corner of the plot, like that would be the percent cover, kind of. Does that make sense? Yeah. So
Is it area or is it mass?
Area.
It's just area.
Mhm.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and then
got
just
that.
someone want to take a second?
As for the development part of that question, in the interviews, development could have meant a variety of things because it was the interviewee's interpretation of what that word meant. Most of the times that it did come up, though, it did involve development that occurred within the woods. So there are residents who do live back there. My guess is it was probably residential development, or we did have some people who knew about the Friends of Hatteras debacle many, many years ago, where there was a golf course considered to be development back there. So in that case, it could have been referencing that. Both of those came up, so I think it would have been either one.
I can expand on that a bit too. I think there was a big concern for adjacent development as well. There were concerns that development on the outskirts of the woods would allow for like penetration of salt spray, killing off further plants. So that was also a concern.
Oh, and by the way, it was excellent. I'm going to read the report. Y'all did a great job.
Yeah, so I was wondering, a lot of things have happened in Buxton Woods on human intervention, logging, grazing, planting of trees. When I first came here, there was a big sawdust pile in the woods from an old logging operation. Could some of the change of the canopy be because the climax forest is just becoming what it would be, and a lot of these things would have succeeded anyway, because now it's not as much human intervention in those areas as it was in the past?
I will say that I was reading one report, and it was saying that without any disturbances, that these maritime forests would transition to more hardwood forests. I feel like we were just looking from 1988 to 2022. We're not exactly sure of what the forest used to look like and what successional stages it was prior to that. So I can't give a full answer. But no,
Yeah, that's something to look into. Once again, that we don't really know now, but we'll look into for further research.
Okay, a few years ago, there was a gypsy moth infestation happening, and like they had traps everywhere, and they were supposed to spray. Is that still a concern? Because as I understand, gypsy moths, they can destroy a forest.
So we've briefly looked into gypsy moths, and honestly have not continued that much. It didn't seem like it was the biggest driver of change, but again, that's something we are going to continue looking into post-presentation. So potentially we'll be talking about that in the report.
No, but it's just a comment. I read this. I don't know if it's true, but when Europeans first came, and Hatteras Island was forested, and England was running out of wood because they use wood for everything. So I don't know how they did it. Supposedly, they removed a lot of the forest, got the logs out into the Gulf Stream, and they went to England. They didn't have to put them on ships. I mean, I don't doubt that, but I'm not sure if it's true or not. Had you heard that at all?
I hadn't heard that.
Okay.
But that's
So
fascinating.
how was the poison ivy in the woods? No, there's a local arborist, I don't know if he's here, but he gave talk down at the museum. He'd been in the woods for years, and he said he ran across a poison ivy vine that was 1.5 feet to 2 foot in diameter. And yeah.
Yeah, we saw poison ivy in our plots. Sadly, it's still there, but yeah. But we didn't see one that was like 1 foot in diameter.
He described it quite big.
Yeah.
All right.
poison ivy thrives on CO2, right? That's what I understand, that the more CO2, the better poison ivy grows. I might be wrong about that.
Well, Lindsay is shaking her head, so yes, I believe you're right.
I know of one study that reported that was done in the Duke Forest where they found that poison ivy proliferated when there was elevated carbon dioxide.
So we're fortunate to be here anyway, because there's less CO2. You go to Sandy Hook in New Jersey, and you're overwhelmed with poison ivy.
Hello, everyone, and excellent job, by the way. I have a different sort of question for all of you. On the human dimension side, you mentioned some shortcomings in your design. And I was wondering, what might you suggest to Dr. Dubbs, and to Dr. Dana, and others to improve, at least remove some of the bias that was in that design for next year or for whenever? Any ideas how you might what you might recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a difficult question. As we talked about, research is normally a lengthy process, and we had a rather short period of time. And as is a consistent problem, funding is difficult to find at times. And so we would love to have a larger sample size where we interview more people to both create the set of concepts, so we draw from a larger population, and to interview so that we can have more perspectives. And so this research could be expanded upon by running the same research again and interviewing a broader set of people. But I think that with the resources we did have and the time we had, I think we did a lot. And so there are definitely aspects that we mentioned that could be improved, but I think it's probably worth noting that what we did with what we had was, I think, a lot. It's not quite an answer, but I hope that speaks to our recognition of limitations, but understanding that they're reasonable to have.
Are there other questions in the room? I think we have a couple online.
First one is from Corey Adams. Surprise. Great presentation. Did this project inspire anyone to pursue dendrology or horticulture as a field of research? Or maybe the opposite?
I will say that I did really enjoy sampling and going through Buxton Woods. I currently also work for a nonprofit that plants a bunch of trees in DC. And so I would like to continue working in an arborist field. If that's venturing into forests, that's great. If that's more data stuff, that's also fine.
One more question from Mountain Spider Girl. Names are fun. How did the students learn how to identify trees which with they were unfamiliar? Was there a limit on the number of types of trees included?
We had a lot of help from Kathy Mitchell in identifying a lot of the plants out there. Jane also put together a low activity with a Buxton Easy Guide, and she went and taped some random plants around CSI that we might also see in Buxton to learn how to identify them. But pretty much there is no limit to the amount of plants to identify, just the ones that were out there. We had to struggle to know them.
Additionally, the 2021 Capstone group did some of the hard work in identifying the plants for us. So they created a guide that we were able to reference when we were out in Buxton Woods identifying everything.
And by they, we mean Jane.
Yes, thank you, Jane.
Did you give any thought to invasive species like the reeds that are spreading by Cape Point? Because that's replacing part of what was the woods. A long time ago, they used to drain the area after a storm and artificially cut change that procedure, whatever, and let the water linger and become kind of wetland. And some years later, these reeds appear, and they're really getting out of control now. And has anybody noticed that?
For us, we only sampled 5 plots, so we didn't sample the whole forest. But I'm sure if you went into more of these swales, you would probably see that happening. But for us, we didn't see any invasive species in the plots that we sampled. But again, our plots are not representative of the entire forest.
But you're probably familiar with what I'm talking about. If anybody that goes to Cape Point, on the side of the road will see the reeds that were not there, certainly 20 years ago.
I've seen.
Years ago,
Phragmites?
Yeah.
Is that Phragmites that you're referring to? Is it the Phragmites that you're referring to? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that it's at Nag's Head Woods, which is another maritime forest. But in Buxton, we didn't see it. But it's probably out there.
I think we have another question on this side of the room. Oh.
Yeah, that was not something in our study.
Yeah, so that's all Phragmites has come in, and it's everywhere. It's kind of invasive. And that section that Jim's talking about that pretty much got eroded when they built the groins at the lighthouse. It eroded the downstream from that, so the primary dune went out, and that got flooded in there like that. So that was a big impact on. It's kind of interesting. You think that something on the ocean beach affected something inland, but it's pretty obvious that that's what happened. You can see it from Google Earth really plain how it cuts way back to the south there.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? We do.
So great work, guys. So one big overarching question I have for you is what you learned this semester, where do we take it from here? What do we learn and where are we going? What should we be looking at as citizens, as managers? What are some questions that we should be thinking about?
So I think a big part of the role we try and play is as an outside, I'm not from here, and we seek to be a more honest broker where we've made these assessments and given our analysis of them. And the hope is that the stakeholders who exist here, whether that be management or community members, take those assessments and understand what they mean to them and how they can use them to make decisions for themselves. In terms of personally, I obviously have everyone has opinions, right? But the hope is that we've provided an assessment of where some people in the community are at and where the woods is at on these plots, so that you all, the community, can make those assessments moving forward. I think the one thing I'd be willing to say is that it's about coming together and finding those ways to move forward. And it's not necessarily our place to decide what specifically that is. And how that moves forward.
I also want to say that a lot more details about our findings will be in our report, which, as Lindsay said, Dr. Dubs said, will be published a few days from now. So, that'll have just a lot more details and insights into our findings.
Also, to expand on that, I think for us to give a little bit more information of what should be done is to know what is being done, and that was an area of study that we should probably do a little bit more of.
And then just to bring back that last quote, it's just keeping a finger on the pulse. So maybe in the past and then now and in the future, just knowing what it's looking like in the community in terms of vegetation and in the stakeholders.
Hi, I was curious as to what your guys' majors are. You all attend Chapel Hill, I believe. Like, what led you to start this project, and like if it's related to your major, or if you did it just out of curiosity. Like, I know a lot of people are passionate about the environment, especially since you all live in North Carolina, or most of you, excuse me. but yeah.
That's a great question. So almost all of us are environmental science or environmental studies majors. So we all care about the environment. And within our major, we have to complete a capstone project before we graduate. So a lot of us are seniors, but there's also underclassmen here. And and UNC-Chapel Hill is a great school, and they offer they offer field site programs, and the Outer Banks field site is one of those programs. You could do your capstone on campus, or you could do it out here on the Outer Banks. So all of us chose to do it out here on the Outer Banks, and I think we all think that was the best decision ever. So, so we didn't get to plan our capstone project, but when we signed up for the field site, I think we had somewhat of an idea of it. But Lindsay and Linda have been planning this project for years. And like I said, they were doing this last year. So this is a continuation study. And they'll do something different next year. And there's a variety of capstone projects that occur on UNC's campus, ranging in interests.
And as the only non-environmental science or studies major here, I major in political science. The beauty of the program and this capstone as well is that it combines both kind of a policy aspect and the environment. Just like this capstone had both the human dimensions and the natural systems. So yeah, great for people who, like me, aren't majoring in it, but care about the environment, and everyone else who is majoring in it, of course, as well. Yeah.
Was there another question?
Unless there are questions.
Yeah, no, I just was making sure that I didn't miss any questioners. With apologies to those online, we have some lovely refreshments for everyone to enjoy.
Yeah, I was just going to give a huge thanks to Lindsay and Linda for doing so much for this project. It may look like our research, and of course we did a lot for this project, but it could not have been possible without the immense work that they put in and the amount they provided for us. So I just wanted to give a huge thanks to them for all the work they did.
Well, we appreciate that very much, and we encourage and welcome everyone to stick around and have a snack and a beverage and meet our students. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be here and support our students and our program. We appreciate it.